So is the US economy about to crash, and why is that? Well, this is a question that, because of what I do, especially focusing mostly on the economic aspect of preparedness, having gone through an economic collapse, I've been asked this question over, well over a decade, a number of, hey, is the US economy about to collapse? Do you see similarities between what's happening here and what happened in Argentina? And usually my answer would be no. There are certain things, there are certain indicators that you could say, but consider the differences. The largest economy of the world compared to Argentina, comparing oranges to apples. But then is what we have now. And today, the scenario is completely different from what it was 2009, 2010, 2015. Today, in 2025, the situation is this. And I came across this from infographics. I'm skipping the first 10 minutes. This is the most interesting part. Let's watch this.
In many ways, the United States dollar acts much as English philosopher Thomas Hobbes proposed benevolent Leviathan, provided.
So it is mostly a very American-first, American-centric view of how benevolent the U.S. economy is with the world, but it gets to some interesting points.
Stability that greatly benefits America both financially and politically. While the U.S. enjoys major benefits from its global economic edge, so does the rest of the world, provided Washington continues to uphold, or at least appear to uphold, its traditional commitment to liberal democratic values. This is why China seeks to unseat the dollar, as it has no interest in using its global economic might to push liberal democratic values. In fact, it is quite the opposite. China favors authoritarianism, and it sees a reduction in global liberal values and human rights as critical for the survival of the Chinese Communist Party.
The video itself, they said it themselves, pretend to uphold these liberal democratic values. Pretend. You're not really doing it. It's mostly about pretending to be like that. Now, it is also true that the Chinese do not even pretend. It is a single communist party. So which one is it that you should choose? Or is there another alternative?
So China attacks the US dollar as vigorously as it can, pushing its own currency to either replace it or at least match the United States dollar. Its professed dream of a world with multiple equal currencies is in fact inherently unstable, promoting unhealthy competition and manipulation or outright sabotage that inevitably could lead to armed conflict.
Is it really that either the United States polices the world and everyone just kneels to the dollar? Is it the only option? And is it true that a balanced economy with different currencies would be unstable? I don't believe this is true, though. I do believe that having China ruling over the entire world would be kind of complicated. I don't think it's going to be all that different from the United States ruling over everyone. But the idea of a balanced economy and having more than one power, just competing, why is that it has to be unhealthy? Usually competition is good, right?
For better or worse, a world unified by a single currency is easier to control, and conflict easier to mitigate, and China's ambitions are of course not actually about balance, but domination. If President Xi Jinping had his own way, China's yuan would replace the dollar entirely. The talk of balance is simply bait for moderates around the world, quickly discarded once the goal is reached.
So there's a couple of differences there. So you have the US dollar being the currency of the world, right? Everyone deals in dollars. China wants to replace the dollar with their own. No, so I would see, clearly having the Chinese currency replace the US dollar, I don't think it would be any better than what we have now. Probably could even be worse. I'm not so sure though about the idea of 3, 4, 5 big players having a more balanced economy and everyone having a little bit of the share. I think that's not bad. I think that's actually better than either of these alternatives. But that's my opinion, and you may have yours.
Foreign attacks on the dollar aren't the only thing pushing the U.S. to the brink, because America is doing a fine job sabotaging itself internally. We talked about America's debt, but currently there's another major driver of the economic downturn: tariffs. America's Liberation Day was supposed to pronounce a new golden economic era, but the data is already proving the opposite. To refresh how tariffs work, they're basically a tax imposed by the federal government on all imports from certain countries. That tax is not paid by the exporter, but rather by the importers here in the U.S., which are often U.S.-based businesses. Thus, for American businesses to get back into the black, they pass a portion or all of that cost down to the consumer, so a tariff is essentially a federal tax on American businesses directly. Tariffs on foreign goods can boost domestic business if companies invest in making those products in the U.S. But America's current tariff policy is showing cracks, driving alarming economic indicators. And soon you may not even see those warnings, as the Bureau of Labor Statistics itself is on the verge of losing credibility. For starters, the U.S. simply does not have a strong manufacturing base. The offshoring of manufacturing during the era of globalism enriched the wealthy elite, but it also stripped the U.S. of a core economic strength. And so much so that the Department of Defense now considers it a critical national vulnerability in the event of a major war. Starting up domestic production of goods and services affected by tariffs is not a realistic response, and even if it was, it would take years to take effect. This means, barring no changes to tariff policy, the U.S. is facing an economic downturn as Americans pay more for the goods and services they've relied on for years. And this couldn't come at a worse time, as the U.S. struggles with ever-increasing wealth disparity and a housing and rent market that is on the verge of being completely unaffordable. Stagnant wages, which haven't kept pace with inflation since the 1970s, magnify the looming problems faced by Americans and worsened by the current sanctions regime, all boiling over into a disastrous cocktail. Also affecting Americans today are inflation pressures from the COVID era. Despite inflation cooling significantly since 2021 and 2022, prices of housing, healthcare, and food remain overheated. Grocery prices have faced a significant upturn, and disasters like disease amongst egg-laying chickens has heightened the burden by driving up the cost of a core necessity, eggs. Everything from milk to butter to bread prices remains inflated, on average 20% across the board since 2019. For many Americans, that extra burden has proven too much, leading some to fear a nutrition crisis along with an economic one. The factors affecting one of the most important economic factors in America, food prices, are multifaceted. Leading among them are supply chain disruptions from the pandemic era, which still affect us today. However, rising fuel prices means higher transportation costs, with the war in Ukraine and subsequent sanctions against Russia spiking global oil prices. Fighting is the world and now are seriously affecting the U.S. The current immigration enforcement regime has most seriously affected the ranks of agricultural laborers across America. Ranches and farms across the nation are reporting their workforce has been rounded up for deportation or are not showing up for fear of being apprehended. Over 50% of agricultural labor in the U.S. is filled by immigrants, and in some places it's as high as 70%. Despite programs like the H-2A, which allow for temporary visas for immigrant laborers, U.S. agriculture still faces a significant labor shortage and thus turns to illegal immigrants. But American immigration officials have routinely rounded up and even deported individuals who are in the country legally, leading to widespread fear of being...
That is true, and I know for a fact that it's making a lot of people that were considering going to the United States for work, or no, I'm not going. Even, professionals, people that are, no, they just have the choice of refusing to go to the United States, and a lot of them are, because they're afraid of getting tangled in this, even when they go legally to the United States. And a lot of people may think, well, that's great, we don't want any, that's not good. You don't want to be the country that people don't want to go anymore, especially not when we're talking about legal immigration, people that will bring business, money, educated people, professionals. You want those people to go to your country. You don't want those people to say, no way in hell am I going to the United States.
Targeted amongst laborers. Predicted given the ongoing nature of raids. In California, ICE raids led to crop losses between $3 and $7 billion depending on the crop, with prices spiking between 5 and 12%. To an American economy still on shaky ground after the COVID pandemic. The pending American economic crash won't have a single factor to blame, and it won't start with banks failing. The seeds of America's economic downfall will sprout simultaneously in several key sectors: the federal budget, U.S. agriculture, and American workers. As the U.S. pours more money into debt payments while dragging down its own GDP with poor economic and domestic policies, creditors will eventually demand higher interest rates. With no other choice, increasing borrowing will lead to the cycle of destruction we discussed earlier as lenders lose faith in the U.S. economy. The current tariff regime only weakens the U.S. by putting the costs directly onto the consumer, further slowing down the economy and creating uncertainty in the minds of creditors. International fear over a U.S. default on its loans would see the dollar quickly lose popularity as a global reserve currency. This would erode America's financial advantage in the world markets and only compound the economic downturn. The staggering losses in U.S. agriculture will also weaken the U.S. economy, forcing Americans to rely on expensive imports. U.S. businesses will begin to face bankruptcy, with some farms and ranches across America already facing economic collapse due to the fleeing of migrant labor. As the U.S. agricultural sector slowly collapses, it only forces an ever greater reliance on more expensive overseas alternatives, putting ever-increasing strain on Americans. All these factors add up to increased costs across the board, further driving up the costs of housing, which are already at catastrophic levels. In the end, Americans will face exponentially higher food prices, decreased international buying power, and a cooling of the U.S. economy with mounting job losses. At that precise moment, the United States is most vulnerable to a major economic shock, such as a new pandemic, major natural disasters, or even war. And one of these is practically guaranteed, because the Department of Defense is even now fully preparing for war with China in the Pacific. As America faces its first major conflict in nearly a century, it is more economically vulnerable than it has ever been. Experts predict that 2027 or 2028 could be the year that the American economy crashes in the midst of a very costly war. America's superpower status may have had its day in the sun, and its failure will be its own fault. If the U.S. economy really is heading for a crash, what about the world's other superpower? Watch why China...
Yeah, okay, so I think it's pretty spot on, especially some of the tariff thing, the immigration thing being handled so poorly. Especially, they were just announcing H-1B visas for $100,000. You won't get anyone with an H-1B visa. Those are the people that actually are professionals. You need to be, or someone that is definitely needed for some kind of business. You are basically turning away people that are legally looking to go into the United States. And that's never a good thing. We are also combining this with dropping fertility rates. We're looking at a world in which everyone is competing for trying to get people into their countries, hopefully best quality of people possible. The way in which you make sure you don't get any of those is having a $100,000 price tag on H-1B visas for legal professionals. That's just another drop in the bucket of this, cocktail of bad decisions, self-inflicted wounds, and terrible economic and political ideas that will have a very negative impact. I pretty much agree. I don't know exactly when, 2027, 2026, may well be the case. Guys, as always, so as to prepare for all of this and a lot more, so survival skills, surviving the economic collapse, especially this last one, surviving the economic collapse, it's going to be super helpful in getting ready for everything that you just saw here. Have a great day. Take care.